I'm just saying this right up front. This episode had one of the most overt Star Trek Enterprise references ever, and I did not get one Scott Bakula cameo. Like, I need my Scotty Bats. Do not tease me with Scotty Bats, Lower Decks. I need him so much. I want more Enterprise. Alright, now that I'm recovering from the Enterprise references, hello interwebs, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, Season 3, Episode 8, Crisis Point 2, Paradoxous. I swear I do this every freaking time that I write down. I literally have a whole notepad of notes about the episode that I'm about to talk about, and I always forget the title before I start recording these things, and I always have to look, and I'm like, I should look at it before I start talking, but you know me, I'm never gonna do that. I'm just gonna hope that the things that come out of my mouth are worth saying. I'm not gonna actually check that. I don't even know what I'm saying right now. Anyways, let's talk about this episode. I'm a professional. Anywho, as you can probably guess by the episode title, this is a sequel, both in-universe and out-of-universe, to the episode from Season 1, Crisis Point, which is one of my favorite episodes of Lower Decks overall. And if you don't remember what that episode was, it was the holodeck episode that was a parody of kind of Star Trek movies and sort of how they're more over the top and more action oriented and very exciting and thrilling and that sort of stuff. And it was ultimately one of the best episodes of that season and the show overall, because it ultimately did also, while it was parodying all this stuff, tell a really emotional story for the character of Mariner that season. And doubly so for this episode, except it's for Boimler, because this episode is all about Boimler making his own sequel and it being kind of more MacGuffin-y and much more like stereotypical action movie plot that Mariner gets very frustrated at. And there's even a joke that this is a contractually obligated sequel, which is what happened with these Star Trek movies. For those of you who don't know, Leonard Nimoy got to direct Star Trek 3 and 4, and William Shatner put it in his contract that anything that Leonard Nimoy got, he got to get. So he got to direct Star Trek 5, which was definitely a movie that exists. It gave me Cybok, and dear God, I love that movie for how ridiculously silly and dumb it is, but it's not necessarily a good movie, but I personally enjoy it, and I think a lot of other people do. It's like one of those, like, so bad it's good films.
Please, Captain. Not in front of the Klingons.
Anyways, it kind of follows off of that joke with Boimler getting to make his own story, and while there is, like, again, so many great references, including a great Star Trek Enterprise reference that had me very excited for a hot second that I was going to get some Scotty Bak's cameos, which I ultimately didn't get, sorry, minor spoiler there. While there's all those references, and all of them are great, not just Star Trek references, but things like Terminator and things like that also get called out. But even beyond that, it's still, I think this is honestly probably one of the most emotionally complex stories that we've gotten for any of our characters throughout the entire show. Like, Lower Decks has always been an emotionally complex show, but this episode particularly, like, I really felt for Boimler throughout it, and it was just like a wow, this is getting kind of deep and existential, and I really loved it, and I was honestly at the end kind of like, wow, I really I'm feeling for this, and I'm not shocked by that, because this is Lower Decks and I know that it can deliver that, and it's delivered it multiple times. But with episodes like this, just prove to me that I think this show is just much deeper than a lot of like people initially give it credit for, because this show is just so wonderfully complicated, and I love it, and yet still being hilarious with all of these references. And there are a shit ton of references throughout all this. Again, this is probably the most notes I've taken on an episode of Lower Decks, and I'm just excited to go through all of it because there are so many wonderful ones. So let's go through the episode now that I've started off here. Let's just run through all of this. So I'm going to get into spoilers. All right, I'm probably going to be looking at my notes more than usual because I have so many, and there's just so many things that I want to call out that I just want to talk about. So we start off the episode with the Cerritos getting attacked by this Romulan ship. And can I say that Romulan ship design looked cool? It's like you can clearly tell it's Romulan, but looks much more aggressive and angry. I adored that. And we get to see these Romulan triplets that run it. And I love that their hair is all slightly different. And it's also a reference to the Duras sisters, who appeared in Next Generation and also were the villains of Star Trek Generations.
I hope for your sake you are initiating a mating ritual.
who were the Klingon sisters, and so the Romulan triplets are sort of a play on that, which was also very clever. But then we get Boimler showing up as the captain of the Wayfarer to save the Cerritos. And I have to say, first off, sexy Sovereign class. Love seeing the Sovereign class in Lower Deck style. It was, so beautiful. Like, the Sovereign class is quite literally my favorite ship design behind just the NX-01 from Star Trek Enterprise. That's why I have them both on my arm right here. I have them both right there. And so I just love seeing the Sovereign class in here. But can I also say, I adore those gray Deep Space Nine / Lower Decks uniforms, where it's like the gray from Deep Space Nine / the Next Generation movies, but the like white stripe of Lower Decks. I, in fact, love that uniform so much that when I saw it in the trailers way back at the beginning of this season, I actually commissioned someone to make it for me. So I'm actually getting a fitted version of that uniform. And I have a lot of cosplays, but this is the first one I'm getting tailor-made for me. So that should tell you how much I love this uniform. I'm literally getting a tailor-made cosplay of this thing. Sadly, I didn't have it ready in time to record this review, but I'm getting it, and you will see it, and I am very pumped about it, because it's just a sexy, sexy damn uniform. Might be probably one of my favorite uniforms that any Star Trek show has done, so loved the design on that. Also, it's very similar, I think a few people called out, to the Star Trek Online uniforms. Star Trek Online uniforms had a very similar vibe to these ones as well. Anywho, Boimler shows up and saves everyone, and we learn that this is indeed a sort of send-up of a movie, a sequel to Crisis Point that Boimler has made, and he's sort of arguing that, like, hey, look, I can make this movie if I want to, because you sort of stole my program and all this stuff, and Mariner kind of having a little chip on his shoulders, like, oh, you're doing, like, a low-rent sequel to my thing. I love how she calls it the Vindictiverse, named after her villain from the first movie. It kind of like the Kelvin timeline or the MCU or something like that. I love that she calls it the Vindictiverse. Couple jokes here. So they clearly steal a MacGuffin, and it's called the Chronogami, which is like time in origami, as they clearly explain, which is a funny name. I love that. And then I love when they freeze the Lower Deck program when they gets called to Ransom's office. That like freezes on Mariner's, Captain Freeman's face in a weird way. I love it when they do that joke. They've done it a few times on the show, and I always love it. Couple other references. Tendi calls out that they call it the contractual obligation joke, and then they also mention kind of like, oh, what if this was like an alternate timeline where like other people like live lives, and Tendi says like, oh, that's kind of a stretch, and obviously that is a reference to the Kelvin timeline movies with Chris Pine. Thought that was great. We also get a reference to like, oh, I hope we don't go back in time to assassinate Kennedy, which was a pitch that Gene Roddenberry himself kept making when he was like trying to get different Star Trek movies made. I forget exactly in the timeline of where he said that, but at some point when he was like pitching movies, he kept being like, what if we went back in time and had Spock assassinate Kennedy, which is just such a weird concept that I thankfully I'm glad that no one did. Maybe you could make it work. I'm not saying you couldn't, but it's Spock shooting Kennedy would be interesting. And then I also love Boimler sort of scrolling through the script on the holodeck. That was also really cool. Just see how holodeck scripts are made, and they look like the film script. I didn't get a chance to zoom in. I'm sure someone will zoom in on that at some point to like read and see if that like script that he has there was actually the script of the movie. So that'd be kind of funny to see if there's any Easter eggs in there. The sexy title sequence was also really cool. I love seeing that. And then Rutherford trying to do a Cajun voice, like, nah, I'm just gonna play it straight. I'm like, probably for the best, Rutherford. And Mariner calling out fan fiction, but Boimler coming back and is clearly sad about something. So I was like, ooh, something's clearly up with Boimler here. Then we go to this research facility, the Gibson, to learn about the Chromogami, and this clearly looks like the Genesis project from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Like, even the scientist that Boimler talks to looks just like Carol Marcus. Boimler is clearly not into being hit on, which is because he's upset, and he's clearly not going into this, like, romance that he had obviously written, and Mariner kind of recognizing that, like, you're not doing the romance plot, and the hologram being like, I don't know what to do now, being kind of interesting. But it also kind of plays into this idea that we saw in episode 1, where Boimler's just not interested in sexy times, which I know some people, I personally read that as him like being on the autism spectrum and him just not recognizing, but also some people have read him as asexual as well. Again, he's a fictional character, interpret him how you want, that's totally fine. I love that there's so many different interpretations of Boimler that you can get out of this, but he's clearly having some sort of existential crisis. And then I adore the old-timey graphics that Rutherford calls out, where you get to see the Constitution class and the Galaxy class ship in the sort of like 80s look. It just reminds me of all those movies that are like, look at the future technology, and also those like lo-fi rent, like 80s like looking lines. I just like that call out. It was just a really cool reference. And they did look pretty sexy. Like, I love those images. It looked great. Then we get a lot of MacGuffin explanations, which was also fun. Then we go down to this planet that they're trying to find these Romulan triplets on, and they see all these people like talking and like saying random like oh, we're like random people on this planet, like conspiracy theory people. And I love some of the callouts. Like one of them says, we're all holograms in a simulation, which like, Yeah, they are, which is great. The koala guides you. We got a reference to the koala that the entire Star Trek universe rests upon. I love every time the koala is mentioned. It's always great. We adore the koala here. We worship the koala here. Do not forget the koala. We all love him here. Why is he smiling? What does he know? Sorry. I also love the evolution of the like holodeck lore here, because Boimler sort of gets drawn off the side because he's having this existential crisis and trying to find meaning in the inherent meaninglessness that the holodeck is creating. And I love that we kind of learned that the holodeck sort of like, if you go off the beaten path of the story, it was sort of like auto generate stuff. And as we see throughout the episode, it like kind of just like randomly creates meaning and like will create like random like inspirational quote generators, or like will like try to stall for backstory. I thought that was all that's actually like really clever and a great evolution of like how the holodeck works and how it's allowed to expand out the program. I thought that was just like just a cool evolution of lore of holodeck lore. I thought was just really excellent. We also meet Knick Knack here, who I'm just gonna say it up front throughout the whole episode. Knick Knack is the best, and I hope he comes back in some form because I adore Knick Knack. He is the sweetest thing ever. I adore him. But then we get an anti-grav chase that Tendi is on. She becomes acting captain, and she just kicking ass, like Tendi just kicking butt. Hell yeah, I'm here for kick butt Tendi. And then they go through the origami threshold to go back in time, and they go back to this algae crisis where there's like this this scientist octopus scientist who helps save the day. And Rutherford's not really taking everything seriously. He's eating a sandwich, and Tendy's clearly bothered by that. So interesting to see there. And actually, I'll just go through Tendi and Rutherford's story, because I did really like that, where we have them go back in time again to this aquarium on Earth and try to rescue one of the octopus's ancestors. And they get attacked by these like punks. And I love Shax, hologram Shax, being like, "We don't want any witnesses," and just beats the crap out of them, which is great. And then Rutherford, and rightly so, being like, "We want to steal their costumes and like look like them. That's like half the fun of this sort of thing." And Tendy be like, "No, we don't have time." And Rutherford's like, "No, I'm gonna steal his pants. I'm at least taking his pants. We need bigger guys." That was great. I loved all of that. But then we get to the part that Lower Decks, you can't tease me like this, where they go to the founding of the Federation, and it's literally the set that we got to see on Star Trek Enterprise, both in I think season 3. We saw it a few times with Archer going to the like founding of the Federation in when he was taken there back in time by crewman Daniels during the temporal Cold War stuff, but also in the series finale of Lower Decks, These Are the Voyages, where we get to see Archer giving the sort of speech, becoming the first president of the Federation. So I love seeing that set, and I was like, "Oh, are we gonna see Archer?" Sadly, we did not. But we see that the Romulans have now just tried to just blow up the Federation at its founding. And they have a little device that is going to blow some stuff up, and it looks like this like radiation device that Shinzon was going to use in Star Trek Nemesis, that he used to kill all the Praetors and the Romulan people in the opening of that movie. So nice little subtle reference there. And then to Anna, because Rutherford's just like singing the Choo Choo song from season 1. Sacrifices herself, and I love her dying words like, "Don't bullshit a bullshitter." Like great holographic Ta'ana ending there. And Tendi rightfully getting upset, well, not rightfully, but like getting upset at Rutherford, and you realize it's not just because he's not taking it seriously, because she thinks that Rutherford doesn't take her being leader seriously. And he's like, "No, I do take you seriously. Of course I take you seriously. Like, you'll be a great captain." And I love that like earnestness. This is why I love Lower Decks so much. It's just these earnest, kind moments between friends. And Rutherford just saying like, "No, of course, like, it's not that I don't take you seriously. We're in a game, but I take you being leader seriously, and you would be a strong captain." And seeing Tendi choosing to want to pursue being a captain, which to be fair, I'm of two minds about this. One, I would love to see Tendi being captain, and it kind of reminds me of Ezri Dax's storyline from the post-Nemesis books. If any of you read the post-Deep Space Nine novels that came out, Ezri Dax had a very similar storyline where she decided to leave sciences and ultimately become a captain, and became a captain of the USS Aventine, which is a great storyline for her. So I love that, and I love that sort of scientist to captain role and idea for Tendi. The only thing that has me mixed on it is sort of twofold. One, we didn't get a ton of Tendi going to be chief science officer this season. We got like one episode about it. I would have liked a little bit more of that before we sort of see her shift into captaincy. So I was a little bit disappointed, because it seems like there's more story on the table for her exploring that role before switching to this one. So that's one element of it that I was kind of like, but we still could see that as we go forward. There are many paths to being a captain. And then also just this other thing of too is like everyone in Star Trek wants to be a captain, right? Not everyone, like clearly we get to see like different people, but it's just, I don't know. There's always this like, yeah, captain's always the goal, for so many people. So I was like, oh, it's a similar sort of thing. And I would like seeing people have other goals than just wanting to be a captain. But then again, I don't dislike it. I do like the scientist to captain. I think Tendi could be a great captain. So I don't hate this like twist. It's just one of those like, I don't know, I'm of two minds about it, is kind of where I'm at. But I still love the earnestness between her and Rutherford doing this. And then I love her being able to save the day by going back in time and giving back the Romulan triplets their own bomb from at the beginning of the episode. So great little ending to that storyline, and love Rutherford supporting her. But then this brings us back to Boimler and Mariner storyline, because Boimler gets drawn off into this whole side story. Again, I love the holodeck, like auto-generating stuff. And we see him sort of get interested in this Kitya follower and like generating backstory. And it like literally is a backstory. His map is on his back, which was gross and nasty. And I loved that. So cool. And just responding to prompts that that they're giving to sort of auto-generate this stuff. Again, Knick-Knack is awesome was a note. And then Mariner sort of being like, I disown this. This is not, you're just like following this dumb storyline. Like, even though your movie is dumb, like, let's get to doing that. And Boimler's like, no, this is me. There's meaning here. And you get to see Boimler trying again. I love the combination of like this thing that the holodeck is sort of generating meaning, and Boimler trying to find meaning in the inherent meaninglessness of life in the universe. And that sort of being reflected in the very concept of how the holodeck works. It's just a great marrying of like lore and how technology works with like the actual emotional core storyline that he is dealing with. It reminds me a lot of this storyline. This storyline kind of reminds me of the same themes from Everything Everywhere All at Once. The movie that came out was one of my favorite movies earlier this year. The sort of like the idea about the existential crisis, the inherent nihilistic meaninglessness of the universe, and ultimately how we find meaning is finding meaning for ourselves and our friends and our community. We create meaning, and that's what the purpose of life is. That's kind of what this episode is really all about. And I love that sort of like different battling philosophical ideas through Boimler and his own existential crisis. And again, being married by the holodeck. Just so clever. I love Lower Decks so much because like it's 20 minutes and I've already talked about a whole other storyline, and yet now I'm talking about existential philosophies with like an emotional character beat with Boimler. Like, God, this show is so good. And then all these references about Star Trek. God, Lower Decks. It's cool, everybody. It's fucking great. Anyways, we go and we get this really touching scene where Ransom and Mariner meet, and he gives her, we get to see a little bit of her storyline here too. Again, great Lower Decks just seeing storylines throughout this of Mariner having improved over the season, like and getting a lot of exemplary recommendations from people, which is something earlier Mariner in season 1, season 2 would not have gotten. But then Ransom reveals that the reason that Boimler has been so upset is because William Boimler, Boimler's clone, is because William Boimler, the duplicator clone that we saw in last season get created, has died. And he died in a fairly meaningless, pointless way. And that's sort of why Boimler's having this existential crisis about the meaninglessness of the universe. And I also like Ransom sort of like saying, like, these are my friends. I don't know how I would get through this without my friends. Again, going to that idea, like, we create meaning through community and the people that we care about, right? So that's what sort of Boimler's feeling at this moment, and Mariner realizing that she needs to be there for him and help him through this. Also, a small little reference here is that one of the people that Ransom calls out is, I believe, I think he calls him Dr. Westlake, which I believe might be a call out to Chris Westlake, who is the composer of Star Trek Lower Decks, and I know a friend of Mike McMahon, like a personal friend of him. So I just was curious if that call out to Westlake was a reference to Chris Westlake, which is a cool little reference, if so, because it just reminds me of like actual real life friendships. I do always love seeing that like personal touch in stories like this. I don't know if that was the intention, but if it was a nice little one. Then we go to Boimler in the brig of the ship, and Mariner going back to it and realizing that like Boimler, like right after she left, got like totally lost in this, and he opens up to her. And again, this was like the core for this episode for me. Just like him, like trying to find meaninglessness and deeper meaning in all this stuff, and Mariner being there for him, and sort of saying like, he died for no reason, but we can find meaning in sort of like fulfilling this holodeck program. You know, it might be an uneven slog, but it's a Starfleet movie, and that makes it worth doing. You know, even the worst Star Trek movie, like Star Trek 5, though that's not the worst one in my mind, Nemesis is, but that's beside the point. But even the worst one, it's still worth doing because it is a Star Trek movie and sort of that ultimate belief in Starfleet. And then Knick-Knack saving the day is like, I'm in love with you, and I'm just like, he sort of rescues them like Scotty does in Star Trek 5, and I'm like, Knick-Knack, you're the best.
Stand back.
What are you standing around for? Do you not know a jailbreak when you see one?
Then they take down the fleshy map guy, and Knick-Knack sort of having these powers, like, yeah, Knick-Knack reveal. And it turns out that, like, you can put the folds of skin together to get the map, which is gross and nasty. And again, I love it. Then we go to this Shatneria planet, which is clearly a reference to William Shatner and the Star Trek 5, like, God planet. They go down to this planet, and it's, again, this algorithm-generated God thing. He's just saying inspirational quotes, again, referencing Star Trek 5. That's always a catch with those sort of thing. And then Boimler's like, no, this isn't right. This isn't enough. And him going in to the god and finding a like Wright brothers thing in there, which is a reference to Star Trek 1, the motion picture, where when you get inside V'ger, it is ultimately revealed to be Voyager, the probe. So that was a cool little reference there. And then he gets knocked out from the heat exhaustion, and he arrives at Kirk's ranch, or Kirk's home. That is a reference to the Nexus from Star Trek Generations. So a lot of like quick little movie references throughout this. And we all think it's like, oh, it's going to be William Shatner. It's going to be there. Like, oh my God. And it turns out, actually, it's George freaking Takei. Like, they actually got Sulu. It's George Takei. It's actually his voice in this episode. And that is just so cool. Like, oh my God, I love hearing George Takei. Such a distinctive voice and such a great guy. I always wish we had gotten that, like, Sulu spinoff that they had always talked about. Sadly, we're never going to get it nowadays. But it is nice to see him here. Great little cameo. And he does sort of give this idea as, like, yeah, I've seen a lot of people die. Sometimes meaningless, sometimes big and epic, but you know, death is just a meaningless thing that is reflective of the joy that we find in our friends. Again, kind of what I'm saying, like we find meaning in caring for each other, and Boimler sort of finding that meaning through that. And so then start asking Sulu all these questions, like, did you sword practice every day? And then Sulu's like, now the horse is gonna bite you now. And then waking up, and Dr. Tana being like, dehydration is real. You were almost clinically dead. Loved that. And then him getting kicked out because the one dude got like leaned up against the warp core twice in one day. Which is great. Dark, but great. And then like Tendi just getting excited. He's like, yeah, it was a lot of fun and joyous. And I love that. Just again, meaning in friendship and that earnest, like kindness, joy that we get between our lower deckers. So just love that ending. But there is one final twist at the end of the episode, because it turns out that William Boimler is actually alive and has joined Section 31 on a Defiant-class ship somewhere. So I'm very curious to see where that is going to go. Sort of have the cake and eat it too, to like tell this story and be like about this sort of like the meaninglessness of death, but then actually William Boimler is going to go off and do this other storyline, which I'm very excited to see. Number one, I always love like clone storylines because I always love seeing like when you have the same person, like essentially, and how they go down different paths based on just the situations that they're placed into and like how that sort of makes them interact. Like those types of stories, whether it be like Thomas Riker from The Next Generation in Deep Space Nine, or probably my favorite one is Farscape. And I know some people, this is a controversial one for people, but the twinning storyline in Farscape is honestly one of my favorite examples of these types of stories, because it is like neither of those characters like good or evil, those versions of Ben Broder's character. But you get to see like they do go down different paths and become very different people, and yet they are still at the core the same person. And the rock paper scissors game that they play at the end of that storyline always breaks my heart a little bit, because you can see they're still the same person, and yet they're still really good. Anyways, I'm ranting about Farscape now, but I always like these storylines. I find them particularly fascinating as a creator and someone reading and hopefully wanting to write fiction at some point. So I just love those ideas. In fact, I'm sorry, this is me getting into my personal shit. I'm writing something now that's like about that, so it's just sort of on my mind. Anyways, very curious about that and seeing where that's going to go. One thing though too is we see he's joined Section 31 and they give him a black badge, kind of like they do in Star Trek Discovery, where in season 1, though it was never. Well, I guess there was the like sort of end credit scene that was cut from the finale of season 1 of Discovery, where we do learn that the black badges are Section 31. It was never overtly stated in officially canon. I think until right now that they were Section 31 badges, except for that one cut scene from the disco finale. But I do love Boimler pointing out, I was like, I thought we were like a secret organization. Why would we have badges that advertise us? Which is something that a lot of fans pointed out was a problem with the black badges in Discovery. So I like that being brought up here. Like, we're supposed to be a secret organization. Why is that the case? And it's like, don't ask questions. Then he sort of gives an evil laugh. Thought that was a great joke. So I'm very curious to see how Section 31 is going to continue forward. And it does make me think about, like, Lower Decks just has a lot of simmering backstories right now. I mean, we have Peanut Hamper and Agamus from last episode in the background. We have William Boimler and Section 31 here. We have Rutherford's sort of secret storyline going on in the background. So there's a lot of, like, background simmering stories being built up in the background of Lower Decks. How many times can I say background? That I'm just going to curiously see how they're all going to interweave them together, or if they're going to remain separate or just distinct things. But I'm very curious and excited to see all of them. We sadly only have 2 more episodes this season, so I'm curious to see what is going to be brought up in those 2 episodes. versus what's going to be coming down the pipe in season 4 and beyond. So very excited we're near the end, but this season continues to excite me, and I love this episode so much. So Lower Decks, you're kicking butt. I love it. But beyond all of that, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down below. And with that said, I will bid you all a live long and prosper.